Welcome back to the Mountain Takes. I'm Isaac. A guide was left behind at extreme altitude with no oxygen and no food. Everyone assumed he was dead. 7 days later, he was still alive. This is the story of survival at the edge of human possibility. Stick around because the real story begins now. It was May 29, 2026, at approximately 7:30 a.m. at Camp 4 on Mount Everest's south side. The altitude was 26,000 feet. The temperature was minus 42 degrees Celsius. The oxygen level in the air was approximately 1/3 what it is at sea level. A Sherpa guide named Dawa Sherpa, age 31, was preparing for a final push to the summit with a Polish client. The client was wealthy, experienced in mountaineering, and had paid approximately $95 for his Everest expedition. Dawa had been hired as his personal guide through a commercial expedition operator based in Kathmandu. The arrangement was standard. The client would attempt the summit. The guide would support him. They would descend together, but nothing about what happened over the next 7 days would be standard. Dawa Sherpa had been working as a high-altitude climbing guide for 12 years. He had summited Everest 7 times. He had guided clients on K2O, on Denali, on multiple 8,000ers across the Himalayas and Karakoram. He was experienced, capable, and trusted by the expedition companies that employed him. He was also poor, earning approximately $3, 0 to 70. 5,000 per climbing season for work that regularly exposed him to altitude sickness, exhaustion, and death. His wife was in Kathmandu. His children depended on his income from climbing. He took the work because the alternative was poverty. The Polish client, whose name was not widely publicized in initial reports, was attempting Everest as part of his personal mountaineering goal. He had successfully climbed other high peaks. He had the fitness and the technical skill to attempt Everest. He also had the economic resources to hire a private guide, to purchase supplemental oxygen, to arrange evacuation insurance. Dawa and the Polish client began their summit push on May 29th, moving upward from Camp 4 into the death zone, the altitude above 26,000 feet where the human body is essentially dying, where every moment at that elevation represents cells being destroyed, where the only question is how quickly you can descend to lower altitude before the damage becomes irreversible. The climb proceeded. Dawa was moving well. The Polish client was moving well. They were making good time. The weather was holding. The visibility was decent. Everything seemed to be progressing according to plan. They climbed through the afternoon, through the evening, through the night of May 29th, 30. By dawn on May 30th, they were above 27,000 feet, approaching the final push toward the 29,032-foot summit. But at extreme altitude, the human body's responses become unpredictable. The Polish client, despite his fitness and experience, began to experience symptoms of altitude sickness. His breathing became labored. His coordination was declining. His judgment was becoming compromised. Dawa recognized the signs. He had seen them hundreds of times, the body's rebellion against the impossible environment. He suggested turning back. The client refused. He said he could continue. He said the summit was close. He said he wanted to push higher. They continued. By midday on May 30th, they were at approximately 27,500 feet. The Polish client's condition was worsening noticeably. His movements were becoming erratic. His speech was slurring slightly. Dawa was watching him carefully, understanding that his job had shifted from guide to caretaker, from facilitator of summiting to preventer of death. At some point during the afternoon of May 30th, the Polish client made a decision that would alter both their fates. He decided to descend. He told Dawa they were turning around. They were going back down the mountain. The descent from extreme altitude is actually more dangerous than the ascent. The body is more exhausted. The judgment is more compromised. The technical difficulty of moving downward on steep terrain at altitude exceeds the difficulty of moving upward. Dawa and the Polish client began their descent. They moved carefully through the afternoon and into the evening of May 30th. They were descending through the death zone, moving toward lower altitude where their bodies might have a chance to recover. What happened next is where the Story becomes unclear because Dawa's account and the Polish client's account differ significantly. According to Dawa's later statement to rescue teams and expedition investigators, the Polish client became increasingly disoriented during the descent. His judgment was compromised by altitude sickness. He was making poor decisions about rope placement, about route selection, about when to rest, and when to continue moving. At a certain point, the Polish client, moving faster than Dawa, moving with less caution, moved ahead of Dawa on the descent. He was perhaps 50 meters ahead, moving down the fixed ropes, descending toward Camp 4 and lower altitude. According to Dawa, the Polish client reached a section of the descent and then simply kept going. He passed Camp 4. He continued descending without waiting for Dawa. He descended alone, moving quickly, putting distance between himself and his guide. Dawa, moving more slowly, more carefully, following proper procedure, was left behind. By the time Dawa reached Camp 4, it was evening on May 30th. The Polish client was gone. He had continued descending toward lower camps. He had not waited. He had not left supplies. He had not coordinated a meeting point. He had simply descended and left Dawa at 26,000 feet with minimal gear, no supplemental oxygen, and no immediate plan for rescue. What followed was 7 days of survival at extreme altitude under conditions that medical science suggests should have been fatal within 48 hours. Dawa had some clothing. He had a sleeping bag. He had the remnants of supplies left at Camp 4 by other expeditions. And critically, he had a small amount of food that had been abandoned, some chocolate bars and other items left behind by climbers who had summited and descended days earlier. He had water, which he created by melting ice using a small stove and fuel that was available at the camp. The first night at Camp 4 alone was the beginning of a nightmare that would last a week. Dawa was at 26,000 feet without supplemental oxygen. His body was in active breakdown. His brain was being starved of oxygen. His lungs were likely beginning to accumulate fluid from the altitude-induced pulmonary edema that affects climbers at that height. His core temperature was dropping despite his sleeping bag and clothing. He was conscious of the fact that he was dying slowly, but dying nonetheless. But Dawa did something that kept him alive. He did not panic. He rationed the food he had. He melted ice for water. He stayed in the tent. He conserved his energy. He understood, from years of experience on mountains, that survival at extreme altitude is about minimizing energy expenditure, maintaining hydration, and waiting for rescue. He knew that climbers at lower camps would eventually realize he was missing. He knew that rescue teams would organize. He knew that his only job was to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. On May 31st, Dawa remained at Camp 4. He was alone. His radio had limited battery and limited range. He could not reliably communicate with camps below. His situation was unknown to most of the expedition. The Polish client had descended to lower camps. He reported that he had summited. He did not initially mention that he had abandoned his guide at altitude. By the time other climbers and expedition leaders realized that Dawa was missing, hours had already passed. June 1st, 2-3 passed. Dawa remained at Camp 4. His condition was deteriorating. His oxygen saturation was certainly dropping to critical levels below 50%, approaching the threshold where the brain cannot maintain consciousness. His body temperature was fluctuating. He was eating small amounts of chocolate and ice. He was melting snow for water. He was doing everything possible to maintain the absolute minimum functions required to stay alive. On June 4th, rescue teams from the expedition, coordinating with Sherpa from other camps, reached Camp 4. They found Dawa alive. He was weak, disoriented, suffering from severe altitude sickness and hypothermia, but alive. He had survived 7 days at 26,000 feet without supplemental oxygen, a feat that contradicts much of what medical science understands about human survival at extreme altitude. The rescue was complicated. Dawa could not walk unassisted. His body had been so thoroughly compromised by a week at the death zone that his legs would not support him. He had to be carried, lowered, supported as he descended toward lower camps. By June 5th, he had reached Camp 2 at lower altitude where his body could begin to recover. By June 6th, he was at base camp receiving medical care. The aftermath revealed several critical details. The Polish client had indeed abandoned Dawa deliberately, or at minimum, had made the decision to descend rapidly without ensuring his guide's safety or well-being. The expedition company investigated. They found that the Polish client had violated basic mountaineering ethics, the responsibility of a climber to ensure the safety of guides and teammates. But legally, there was limited recourse. The Polish client had paid his fee. He had reached his goal of attempting to summit Everest. Dewa had survived against extraordinary odds. What makes Dewa's story significant is not just that he survived, though survival at that altitude without oxygen is medically remarkable. What makes it significant is what it reveals about the system. A wealthy client could pay $95, zero, to attempt Everest. A guide could risk his life for $3, zero, to $5, zero. And when the client abandoned the guide at extreme altitude, there was no mechanism to hold the